Hello and welcome to The Appetite, a podcast brought to you by Opal Food and Body Wisdom, an eating disorder treatment center in Seattle, Washington. I'm your host, Carter Umhow, a therapist, artist, and writer. And today I have the honor of talking with Tina Muir, and I'm sitting down with her as well as Opal co-founder and head of the exercise and sport program, Kara Bazzi. Tina, welcome to The Appetite.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I'm thankful for you guys and all that Opal has done. I mean, I've been admiring you from afar for many years, and I just love what you're doing to help so many people. So I'm just as excited to be here.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
That means a lot to hear you say that.
So for those of our listeners that aren't familiar with you, can you just let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so as people probably already guessed, I am British, but I live in the US. Have been here for, I think, 12, maybe 14 years at this point. So pretty much American at this point. I came over here initially on a scholarship to run at a university in Michigan, not at Michigan. Whenever I say that, people think, oh, you went to Michigan? Not at Michigan, in Michigan.
Good distinction.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'd love to say I ran for U of M, but I didn't. So I went to school here and just kind of stayed here, met my husband, and then continued on as a elite/professional runner. And I did pretty well. I represented Great Britain in the World Half Marathon Championships, which was my ultimate goal. And I got my marathon down to 2:36. Which is funny at this point in time, especially with the way American marathoning has progressed. In 2016, 2:36 was pretty damn good. But now the level has stepped up so much that it doesn't really feel as impressive anymore because the quality, especially over here in the US, but in the UK and worldwide as well, has just blown up.
Yeah, it's crazy, huh?
I was really proud of that. Had I still been running now, I think that wouldn't have felt enough, but I'm kind of mostly known for my decision to stop running 3 months after running my personal best in the marathon, less than a year after running for Great Britain in the World Championships. I quit running potentially forever because I had not had a period in 9 years. And I also was kind of burned out of the sport at that point from probably a lot of it, my, lack of fueling, but a lot of it also just from many years of training, and I became kind of one of the faces of overcoming amenorrhea and trying to convince women to get their periods back and get their health back. And I fell pregnant within 10 weeks of stopping running.
Wow.
So I kind of like to think I'm a little bit of a beacon of hope for people that even if you haven't had a period, doesn't mean it can't be fixed.
And how old is that child now?
Just over 2, and I'm pregnant with my second child as well.
Congratulations. And there's the big news about signing with a shoe company. Yes.
So in January, Ultra Running, which is one of the shoe companies, kind of made history by becoming one of the first running shoe brand to sign not just one, but 2 pregnant runners. They are very aware that Alicia Montano, who has been a huge player in the kind of rights for women, getting things for women that we've deserved for a long time. Wow. Myself and Alicia, neither of us expect to be running personal bests anytime this year, but Ultra still decided to take that step and support us and say, you're so much more than your performance. So it's a really cool thing to be a part of.
So cool. To not just talk the talk, but do it.
Yeah, that was something that I was so interested in when I read about that, because to be valued for more than just your time, your personal bests and your capacity, but also for your voice, that feels like probably a very large symbol of a shift in the running culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot more of the brands had shown, some of the brands not at all, but quite a few brands had kind of tolerated pregnancy. If you kind of happen to get pregnant during your contract, congratulations, we hope to see you back out there sometime soon. Whereas this signing 2 people while pregnant is, just a massive sign that, we are choosing you because of your pregnancy, or as that is a part of you rather than despite the fact that you might make that choice.
So, Tina, I want to back up a little bit and ask you a little bit more about what running was like before this new season for you, before you quit. You spoke some of that, the symptom of that being 9 years without a period, but I'm assuming there was some disordered eating during that time as well.
Yeah, the period was kind of the big giant red flag.
Yeah.
But there was obviously other things that looking back on now, my body was screaming at me for help. I know both of you will kind of chuckle at this, and probably many of your listeners. I had seen many quote unquote nutritionists over the years, spoken to people who had looked at my diet, taken a 3-day window and said, actually, it looks fine. I don't think there's anything wrong. But it was only when I started working with Nancy Clark that it really dawned on me that actually I was restricting a lot. And I knew I was restricting, but as I've learned a lot, and as you both know, and many of your listeners probably know, everyone is different. And, I would compare myself to other elite runners. I would say, well, I'm eating more than they are, so it's obviously not food. But, for me, that wasn't enough. Because friends could get away with having their periods and eating less and being leaner, lighter. That doesn't mean that I could. So I think I've learned a lot about, that everyone is different and we all have our own kind of set point on what our body is comfortable with. I always saw that as a disadvantage, that it wasn't fair that my body seemed to be so sensitive. However, now I see it as a big advantage because, I have this indicator that I need to make a change in my life, whereas other people may end up further down a path or may end up kind of putting their body in more extreme danger before they realize because they don't have that warning sign. But I did have other things, like I was convinced I had Raynaud's when really I know that was just my, body was shutting down some of the blood flow to my fingers and toes. I was quite moody at times. And so all the signs were there while I was running at the top level.
Did you also experience stuff psychologically in terms of, were you pretty preoccupied with food? Did you have that part of the disorder, or was it mainly kind of physical, mental? Yeah.
I mean, it definitely started off as performance only. When I first started, I guess, restricting and trying to lose weight, it was purely to get faster. But over time, it then became like about aesthetics. And the more it became about aesthetics, the more I, was thinking about food. And it would, kind of be a case of, I just remember so many times having lunch and then an hour or two later, my stomach would rumble and I'd be like, you must be kidding me. I just fed you. Like, I can't be hungry again. Like, I must just be bored. And I remember getting really angry at myself, like, okay, well, you're just going to have to wait for another hour because I'm not giving you anything now. And then so many things, I was going out for dinner. So, okay, well, it's 4 p.m. and I'm going out at 6:30 and I'm starving, but I know I'm going to eat a lot tonight. So I'm going to you just have to have some carrots and shut up. Just quite cruel way of talking to myself just because I was angry at it for being hungry. I've talked a lot about my sweet tooth, how I had like a crazy sweet tooth. And my first website, my original blog was called Insatiable Sweet Tooth because it really was insatiable. Like I always joked I could eat an entire tub of frosting in one go, and I genuinely could. That was because I was so good at eating very clean, eating very healthy so that I could save everything up. And then at night I could just go to town on my sweets without worrying too much about gaining weight. But yeah, I did get into phases where I would weigh myself multiple times a day naked because, you have to keep it, you can't have clothes affecting things. And the scale would, as we've heard many stories, would dictate my day. We heard about Mary Kane talking about it. I felt the same thing. I could go into the bathroom in a good mood and I would come out. If I'd seen a number I didn't like, I'd be in a bad mood. And my husband would be like, what just happened?
Were there difficulties when you quit running with tackling kind of these different food attitudes while taking out the sort of element of exercise? Because you weren't exercising at all, right?
No, yeah, I stopped completely everything. No, and I know this kind of really frustrates people in recovery because it doesn't make any sense. And that is why I've only really admitted that I had an eating disorder, or, as I've said, I don't know if we ever truly recover 100%. So I don't know. I always thought, well, how would I, if I had an eating disorder, how would I have just gone the other way so easily? How would I have put on 25 pounds with no problem and stopped running and not worried and not really had too much of a trauma or just struggle during that transition? I mean, I did definitely have that struggle, and the book No Period Now What was a huge help for me in moments that I did kind of fear that paranoia. But Nancy Clark was a great person for me to kind of shift my perspective during that time and see things differently and ease the fear of not being able to stop eating so much and ending up obese. But I really, as much as it frustrates people, I think because of that 14 years of straight training, because my sister had just had a baby and I'd seen that finally that desire to have a child was higher than my desire to run, and just the burnout and the decision that I made the choice to step away myself. Yeah, I really kind of, I don't want to say breezed through it, but it wasn't as difficult as most people that reach out to me seem to find.
Yeah. I relate to that, actually. I remember I had an eating disorder as well. And there was a point where my desire to not have it got large, got very large. And there was enough motivation that I see it as this just like a huge shift where all the tension that was there in my eating disorders kind of melted away, even though there were struggles from there on out and certainly years of unpacking different attitudes. But there's definitely a moment where I was like, oh, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to stop having these behaviors. And I know that that's not the case for everybody. I know that that can be really difficult, but I hear it in you that this desire for a child and a desire to recover your period too was so motivating that it really melted some of the other tensions away.
I also wonder too, I don't know if this was the case for you, but if a lot of the disordered eating and all of these concerns were wrapped up in the competitive running, did you experience having like kind of a normal relationship with food prior to getting really competitive in your running?
I've wondered that as well. Like, if it was with the running and that's what people often ask me, if I'd go back to professional running. And the only way I could do it is if I could remove any kind of pressure to perform and make it kind of an accidental. If I was just kind of training and I accidentally ended up at the top again, that's the only way I really could see myself doing it without trying to control everything. But my dad did all the cooking when we were, he still does. And he very much gave us like a well-balanced meals for dinner. He, was very good at getting in foods that were good for us, but also he was never someone that restricted. If we went out to dinner with him, he would get whatever he wanted on the menu. So my sister and I learned that, and we took that approach. My mum did have an eating disorder before she had me. It took her 5 years to get pregnant with me. So she still had a few of the behaviors growing up, and I could see some of those looking back now. But I think my dad's kind of attitude rubbed off more somehow. I genuinely believe I did have a very healthy approach to eating until I overheard a coach telling an athlete on my team in college that she could lose some weight. And then I asked him the same question, and he said, yeah, you could lose a few pounds. I think until that moment, I hadn't really considered how restricting or changing your foods could really make that much of a difference. I'd seen girls who'd barely eaten and had run well for a few years. To me, that always just seemed like a car trying to drive without any gas. I didn't really understand how that worked. So I just kind of wrote them off as, well, they're like freaks that can run on empty somehow.
Yeah, my story is pretty similar in that way of I didn't develop restrictive behaviors or attitudes until I got to college with my college distance running experience. And so in my recovery too, I think I would call myself, I was an eater, like going into that experience. And so in my recovery process, I think there was a lot of years that I could kind of go back to of having relaxed attitudes around eating. And so, yeah, removing that competitive element for a bit helped. And then kind of and then approaching that actually head on around weight and performance. And that's why I've been so interested in the topic over the past 15 years, because can someone, if that is a component that makes somebody engage in disordered eating, like where are some of the examples of, or is it really, I've been very interested in engaging that question. Like, do we have to be manipulating weight to be at peak performance at the high levels? Yeah, I guess I feel curious about kind of what you've been exposed to in the elite community.
Well, firstly, I can't speak to the last few years. I haven't really been around that since 2016. And I do think the community has changed a lot since then. However, I saw a lot of disordered eating patterns and strange habits in the running world. And it definitely didn't make it any easier. I remember multiple occasions where I'd try and set up a meal like the night before a race, because for me, the night before a race, the morning of a race was like I would restrict, many times, but that time I took it serious. I was going to eat a giant bowl of pasta or a giant whatever meal I wanted to have. And so for me, that was non-negotiable. I didn't care what my weight was the day I stepped out onto the start line, because I knew that I couldn't run without fuel. So I would try and set up meals like, hey, do you want to all go out to eat? And people would initially say yes, but then one by one back out and say, I'm just going to eat in my room. And I always got frustrated with that because that wasn't how I approached things. And then, there'd be many cases where we'd go to events and stay in a hotel and everyone would get their food and take it back to their rooms. And I just couldn't really understand that, and it was very uncomfortable even when people were around, because especially the morning of, a lot of people like pick at their food and barely eat. And I'm quite like a mothering person, so I'd find it really hard not to say like, don't you think you need a little more than that? Like a little more than half a slice of toast? Because I couldn't see how they were doing it still, but I couldn't say anything. But then that would make me feel like, well, am I eating too much? Because they're faster than me. Yeah. But it never got to the point where pre-race I would affect what I was eating. I ate what I wanted to eat and what I felt I needed to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I sure remember those hotel room, the funky things happening with food. It's hard. Yeah. And the isolation, it's just, that part is also really sad, of the isolative nature of what athletes think that they need to be doing. And then I even remember kind of the competitive feeling too of not wanting, just kind of who's going to get the edge over the other person, and how they might do that with their eating. And all of it is just, I mean, at this point, I just feel like, oh, it's so sad, because a lot of that is, it's not even accurate.
There's also the side of it for me that I would think like, hey, this is part of the celebration. Like, we get to go out for a meal before and celebrate the fact that we're here and we're healthy and we get to run tomorrow. And yeah, okay, everyone's a bit nervous, but I'd always been very vulnerable and open about how I was feeling. So I kind of welcomed that time, and it, like, I loved going out to like an Italian restaurant or whatever it may be, like taking my time picking a place that made pasta homemade on site or whatever it might be. But other people would just, I'm just going to go to Panera Bread. And I would just thought, get that anywhere.
Not fun.
Yeah.
I appreciate so much your like kind of tone of bewilderment around some of these other attitudes that you were watching around you. You're describing these different scenarios and like sitting there across from someone like at breakfast, or like, how is this person running so fast and not eating? Like, there's such a bewilderment and sincerity in that I appreciate, because it does speak to how bizarre it actually is that you could run that fast and not eat. And also from what I know too, that period of peak performance with very little nutrition is a very short-lived experience. Like, you can't do that for very long. And so there is sort of a mystery around that, of sort of like watching maybe someone in a period of their life before they've had an injury due to malnutrition or something like that, where you're like, how is this working? Because it really doesn't for very long.
Yeah. And I think, but then on the other side of things, I look at myself and I think, I didn't have I had one stress reaction, and that was like a year into into my like lack of periods. But the rest of the time, I didn't have any bone issues whatsoever. That's one of the big signs if you keep getting injured, especially the femoral, the sacral, the pelvic fractures, and that's a massive warning sign. But I had restrictive behaviors, and I definitely was monitoring my food and trying to lose weight. But yeah, I never took it to an extreme, because like you said, it just kind of blew my mind that people could have the energy. Like I've said before, that I feel like it's kind of like your batteries need a charge, like empty, or you need a new set of batteries, but you're trying to like play some music and through a speaker, and there's no batteries left. Like I just couldn't. How does that even work? So, but my like love of enjoying food at experiences, like at meals out or celebrations and things like that, was in some ways, I think, what saved me, because I always had those kind of occasions of where I was eating enough to where I could get away with keeping going with this kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, you're talking about the pleasure piece, and I think that's, if a athlete is kind of always kind of on the edge around how kind of minimal I can eat but not have any REDS, relative energy deficiency and sports symptoms. But then there's also this other aspect of what about, not engaging in the pleasure side. And like you're talking about the wonderful opportunity for community and celebration and seeing people at these races and being part of a group of people who share a love for a sport, and like that also being a driver for behavior is pleasure and enjoyment. And I didn't think about that in college as like something I was really missing out on. It wasn't until later that I could really experience all the grief of what I lost in my obsession with my performance and with food. And I'm hoping too that people that listen to this could even give a pause of like, it could be fun. It could be pleasurable. Like that part could actually be something that people like you would not want to compromise. That aspect of it.
Yeah. It makes me curious too, Tina, about you described earlier kind of like this cruel voice in your head, and you described that so well. Like I really could feel what it felt like for you when you were more restrictive. Makes me curious about like what that voice sounds like now, considering especially the fact that you've had this capacity for pleasure that hasn't really waned.
I mean, I still have a lot of negative thoughts that come in, but they're kind of, everything is like flipped on its head right now. And, granted, we know I'm 6 months pregnant. That is probably a huge part in this. But to be totally honest, right now, this whole pregnancy, I have not enjoyed food at all. Like it's really sad for me. And in some ways, I've been kind of mourning it, because every time I have to eat, I'm like, I just like if I could have a drink at the beginning of the day that had all my calories, I would do it, because right now I just have I haven't really had like massive cravings for anything. I've had a few things that kind of sound better than others, but right now it's more kind of a like walking into the kitchen, opening the fridge door and being like, ugh, like what sounds the least bad here. So it's kind of a bit of an anger at myself. Like why aren't you, I know I am eating because I know I need to, but it's only because of the baby, because if I know that I need to eat to give the baby fuel to keep going. But like, so the negative voice right now is kind of a bit of like annoyed at myself for not, like, come on, you're telling me you can't find anything that sounds good in the cupboard or the fridge. Like, so it's still quite negative, but I know now to kind of, how to talk back to myself. So when I say that, it'd be like, well, you know what? Like, okay, nothing sounds good, but something's got to sound somewhat okay. So just have some of that for now, and then you can have something else in a little while. So just kind of, I've learned that their negative thoughts are always going to be there, but just how you respond to them can change. And you can, like when I was saying about you can eat some carrots and shut up earlier, the response would have been, yeah, but why am I so hungry now? Like, that's obviously a sign. Maybe have some carrots with hummus. Okay, that's something a little bit more calorically dense. Maybe that'll keep you hungry, keep you full a little bit longer. So just kind of a bit more of a gentle voice in return to myself.
Oh, I know with clients that I've worked with, they expect that there's going to be sort of this like perfect, like always compassionate, always wise, always like exactly recovery oriented, whatever that means when it comes to food. But the way that you just described that sounds so much more realistic, that there are times that still food doesn't sound that good, or you're having trouble finding motivation to eat. Right now you're pregnant, so that really makes some sense. And it's more about the conversation that happens internally, not just this sort of like perfect thought that's going to keep you going.
And just what to deal with, I hear in that of you do have pleasure in food. And so now you're in this position again where you don't have full control over your body, you're pregnant. And with that part of it not as more, you're not experiencing the desire and the pleasure as much, how like you're in a stage of mechanical eating a lot more and having to just have grief around that, of just kind of the reality of that's kind of where your body's at while being pregnant right now.
Yeah.
How you're managing that.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking, I've had we went to Mexico and my daughter got a bug and she's basically hasn't been able to eat much for a week. And she finally turned a quarter with some medicine. And she's like, finally, like, I actually want something to eat. And I'm like, wow, to watch her go through a whole week of not wanting anything, this little 10-year-old. And then I actually want something. She had to do mechanical, we were just getting anything we could into her body, but none of it was pleasurable. Right. So just this picture of, the different stages of experiences with food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tina, I'm wondering where you are right now. I know you're pregnant and I'm not sure what your plans are with running after having this baby. And I know you have your own podcast where you've been interviewing athletes. And I'm just kind of curious kind of what you're seeing now in this role in the running community and kind of where you see the growth happening or places you have hope or what you see going on right now in the running community and reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think things are definitely changing in the right direction. I do think, obviously, Mary Kane was the biggest catalyst we've had to this conversation, but I think it goes so much more beyond just her sharing her story and everyone saying that's so sad, that's so hard, crying at it. I think, what can we actually do here? The biggest person that I feel has been helping with this is Lauren Fleshman. I mean, she wrote the article to her high school self. That was a huge thing. But she's also been kind of advocating for colleges to take things more seriously, encouraging incoming high school kids or high school kids going into college to vet their coaches, to talk to them about their periods and to talk to them about what the eating climate is like within the team and encouraging people, if you go to visit a team and everyone just eats a salad, like that's a huge red flag. Like, so I think a lot of it is going to be the high school generation. We've got to change it at that level, the college level. There's so many kids when you look around the college level that are just like, you can tell that they're like hanging on by a thread. And like we said, they might last a year or so, but then they burn out. And until we can change that attitude and approach in college, we're just going to keep pumping out people who are going to shine bright for a few years and then burn out. But I do think there are people who are doing that. I hope that I'm one of them. Again, Lauren, I think, is a huge one because people really look up to her and want to learn from her. As for myself, I mostly want to play a role within that. I want to do what I can to inspire other women and men, but particularly women, to show them that you are more than what you look like, that the way you look doesn't make a difference. And even that we've got to remember this like critical voice that I mentioned earlier, like is always going to tell you that you're the big person, when in fact you're probably not. And it's probably not that different. We've all got these body distortions. So I'm hoping that I can be someone that can show people that they've got more to offer than the way they look. But then my own running, I mentioned earlier, I don't know. Right now, I would say there's a 30% chance I'd go back to it. I don't see a clear path for me back to that level without putting this pressure on myself of having to prove myself and having to like overcome the negativity. I think I would have to come at it at a kind of Zen approach as to enjoying the process of pushing myself, enjoying the struggle, enjoying the hard, rather than it being a means to an end. To me, when I think of going back to elite running, I think of putting myself in the well, work out so hard I fall over and throw up, and I just don't want to go there. So, I think I'd have to find a different path, and I still don't know if that's possible for me.
Yeah, Tina, when you're talking about that, it reminds me, we've had, I think, a couple episodes on our podcast where we talk about this, like some of the work we've done at Opal with athletes around like an excellence versus perfectionism approach, where the perfectionism is more outcome driven and the excellence is more the process driven, and kind of helping people have a blueprint and walk down that path of switching from kind of that perfectionism to the excellence side. And I really hear that. I just heard basically to use you kind of say that in through your experience of what you'd need to do differently.
Tina, you were just talking about hoping to be an inspiration for other runners and athletes, and I definitely want to claim that you are.
Yes.
And I know that you have a series on your podcast, Running for Real, called Beyond Running, and that just seems like such a beautiful place where you're talking about issues beyond sort of the specific category of running that are more mental health issues. And that is just such a beautiful offering.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you say that about me actually being an inspiration, but that's again a good example of our like critical mind.
Yeah.
I see that and I say, yeah, but Lauren's doing more, or Cara's doing more, or Zilla. Like you always kind of downplay what impact you've had. But the Beyond Running series was just really important to me. And I think a lot of that is because of what I do. Everything Running for Real is about is, the whole tagline is, so you feel like you're not alone. I get so many personal emails from people who pour their heart out to me, like telling me their deepest, darkest secrets, things that they haven't told anyone. And I feel such a privilege that they feel brave enough to share that with me. But I also want to, a lot of the time I don't know what to say. Like, I've had a few people tell me that they're thinking about transitioning, and I want to be supportive, but I don't have the knowledge of what to say. So things like that, what can I do for that person in the future to make them feel less alone, to make them feel better? And that's where suicide came into things, anxiety disorders. I have covered eating disorders many times, because if I can help just a few people with something that they're struggling with and they feel like they've got no one to turn to, then, that's worth it. So, I'm going to keep finding ways to make people feel included, because I just hate the idea of someone suffering alone. Yeah,
I mean, that in of itself is hugely significant, that you've been open and that you have this venue too through your podcast where you have access. There's so many people that have access to you putting yourself out there, and then people feeling the freedom to then do that back and not feel isolated. I think that is incredible. I also was thinking, I kind of relate to what you're saying of like, I'm not doing enough. But then I've also recently, with so many people now out there and trying to make changes in the running community and the sport community, I feel like now more and more like, there's so much to be done, and we're all kind of in this together in different areas of the country and the world, and we're doing our own, parts with our own communities of influence, and it's exciting to think like, that we all are helping make these changes. And I've been so inspired by you. I mean, it's fun. I've been inspired by Lauren for years, and you and Kara, and I love that these voices are becoming more public.
Yeah, well, and I just want to add to that I just said it myself, that I don't feel like I'm doing enough, but I want to say to anyone listening that, like, sometimes we get so caught up in numbers of like followers and like likes and shares and all this stuff, but like no one life is more valuable than any other. So like if you in your inner circle have, 25 friends, and one of them is struggling with something like an eating disorder, and you help them get help, you point them to the right place to, find someone who turns their life around, I mean, that in itself is beautiful and wonderful, and like it's so like sad. And I do it, as you heard, as well. That we say, oh well, I only helped one person, or I only have 200 followers, so I can only help a few people. But like we all have our role to play, as you said. Like it's not just the people in the limelight.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Well, before we end, I know you said something earlier about Jamela Jamil, and in line with sort of talking about different inspirations and voices, I'd be curious to hear, maybe it's her, maybe it's someone else, just places that you're really finding some inspiration, even beyond the running community, so that our listeners can find those things too and benefit from them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people in the running space, in the industry, that are fighting the good fight and trying to get the word out. Renee McGregor, as I mentioned, Dr. Gaudiani, Nancy Clark, Jessie Haggerty, Sarah Canny, all those come to mind in the kind of running space of people that are promoting the right attitudes and ideals. But Jamela she's not in the running industry, not a runner as far as I know. I really like her. She was Tahani on The Good Place. And she has set up her, I don't know if it's a foundation or it's definitely a social media account. That's all I know. I think she's got 1 million, 2 million maybe followers on that. And it's called I Weigh, just spelt the way you'd think it would be spelled, I Weigh. And it's all about inclusion and just, changing your perspective and making it a place where everyone can be a part of something.
It's absolutely incredible. She has so many good conversations, and wouldn't it be cool if she talked to you one day?
Yeah.
I've got her on my list, but I think I'm quite a long way away from that. Especially if she is quite.
I'm binge watching The Good Place
person.
right now. So my daughter and I are almost done with season 2. We love that show.
Oh, well, Tina, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
It's been really wonderful to hear more of your story and your thoughts. You have so much wisdom and inspiration to offer, and we really appreciate having you here with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you. As I said, you guys are changing the lives of people, who need it, and I'm ever grateful. So on behalf of all those people you've helped as well, I want to thank you as well.
Thank you so much. If you want to learn more about Tina, we definitely suggest that you do. You can read her wonderful blog post at tinamuir.com. We'll also be linking to her podcast, so you can keep up to date with who she's talking to and what she's talking about. So definitely subscribe to Running for Real as well. Thank you to Daniel Gunther at Jack Straub Cultural Center for sound engineering, to Aaron Davidson for the Appetite's original music, and to Hans Anderson for editing. Join us next time.